I did my presentation on Andrea Yates. This is a photograph of her family. It's Andrea over there, her husband Russell, 4 of her boys. Not pictured is the youngest child, Mary. She was a girl. She was only 6 months old at the time. So a little bit about the case. Around 2001 in June, Andrea drowned all 5 of her children, one after the other one, and placed them in the bed, covered them up with a sheet, called the police, and then her husband. She had been diagnosed with depression, postpartum depression. Maybe some psychologists had thought that she was schizophrenic. So she definitely had some delusions and hallucinations and a little bit of psychosis. So she was severely mentally ill for a lot of the years since she had her children. And she had gone through multiple hospitalizations for attempted suicides, and she was on many antidepressant medications, but none of them seemed to be working. She wasn't responsive to therapies. But one of the major influencers that seemed to be these 2 individuals, Michael and Rachel Warrenecki. Well, Michael's a preacher, and he kept in contact with Andrea throughout her move from Texas to Florida, back to Texas with her husband. Michael berated Andrea, said she was sinful, said her children were sinful, said they were going to pay for her sins, said Satan was always watching her, all of this stuff. And that could have been a reason for materialization of Satan in some of her delusions that she would later have. Another influencer in her life was postpartum depression. Postpartum depression occurs mostly in women, but in about 8% or so of men it does occur, and it is something that happens after a child is born. Symptoms could include inability to bond with the child, not enjoying life, volatile mood swings, being aggressive, crying all the time, but the most important is obsession with the infant or with the child that triggered the postpartum depression. So this could include having fantasies or thoughts about hurting the child, other people hurting the child, and this could lead to potential crimes. After Andrea was arrested, her defense attorneys placed her under multiple tests, had a lot of psychologists visit her, tried to determine if an insanity defense was viable. They did decide to pursue an insanity defense. Texas is one of the states that applies the McNaughton rule. So traditionally, the McNaughton rule has 2 components. The first one is that the perpetrator of the crime does not have or lacks knowledge and awareness of the consequences of the act. And the second part is that the perpetrator did not know the actions were wrong. But in Texas, they only adopt the second part. So in order for a defendant to be found not guilty by reason of insanity, the defense would have to prove that the defendant did not know their actions were wrong. So it extremely limits the defense's opportunity to bring an insanity defense. Andrea's lawyers presented psychologists that explained she had no knowledge of what she was doing was moralistically wrong. Although they did acknowledge that she might have known legally that killing her children was wrong, she did put bed sheets over them to be respectful. The reason that she killed her children was because Satan was going to get them and she wanted to protect them from him. The trial lasted about 3 weeks. The jury took about 3 hours to deliberate, and they came up with a guilty verdict. She was found guilty of a capital punishment and needed to be sentenced to see if she would be subject to the death penalty or just life without possibility of parole. During this time, Andrea's lawyers investigated the testimony of this man, Dr. Park Yates, who stated that he had worked on various shows such as Law and Order to determine if their information that they provided to the public was accurate, provided verifiable statements, stuff like that, and was an expert witness. He had stated in court that an episode similar to the case of Andrea Yates, where the woman drowned all of her children due to postpartum depression, and then pled insanity and was successful at it, had aired about a month prior to Andrea's commission of the crime. The prosecution relied heavily on Dr. Yates' statement and provided this information also in the closing arguments. Dr. Yates' statement provided evidence to the prosecution that Andrea Yates' crime was premeditated, that she was fully confident and fully aware of what she was doing and did it anyway, and decided that she was going to use insanity as a way to escape conviction. However, Andrea's lawyers determined that no such episode of Law & Order existed. It was never created, it had never been written, never aired, nothing. So the prosecution relied heavily on false testimony. When brought to the attention of the judge denied the defense attorney's plea for mistrial, and then the defense attorneys appealed to the First Court of Appeals of Texas. The appellate court did grant the appeal of Andrea Yates, and a retrial was taking place. The article stopped at that point, but I had looked up what happened, what was the end result of the retrial, and it was determined that in 2006 her retrial occurred, and she was found not guilty by reason of insanity. She is now housed in Kerrville State Hospital in Kerrville, Texas, where she'll most likely spend the rest of her life getting treatment, hopefully going through therapy. So the major error in the case was obviously the false testimony of Dr. Yates and the prosecution's heavy reliance on this information without verifying the source. It would have been easy to prove. So that's the end of my presentation.